Hey everybody! I know it's video number 2, right? So the cause of the Civil War. If you're looking for video number 1, yeah, this ain't the video for you, okay? This is video number 2. So this would be the second one you should be watching after taking the assessment on video number 1. See how this works? So you watch video number 1, take your notes on video number 1 while you're watching it, and then you take the assessment, right? Not video, 1. That's right. Assessment number 1. See how this is the process. Okay, I promise you, this is basically the same process we've had for like all of e-learning. Yeah, so if you're looking for video number 1, again, this is for video number next, right? Okay, so you're in the wrong place if you're the first one, okay? But for those of you who've taken care of everything with the first one, this is for you. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. I told you the other time that we're going to be talking about this thing called Bleeding Kansas. Sounds exciting, right? And it depends on your perspective of exciting, I suppose. So let's go ahead and get jumping into that. So hopefully you got your note sheet out because, again, you need the note sheet so that when you go to the assessment, you can do well on it. See how this works? You watch the video, take the notes, do the assessment. Wash, rinse, and repeat. Okay? All right, so let me get this pulled up here for you guys. That's right. I know y'all love my hair. Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is where we finished up last time, right? This is the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854. Okay. Now, Northerners are mad, right? Popular sovereignty is the thing. Southerners are like, yeah, we got a chance. Okay. So here's what happens. This gets us to what's called Bleeding Kansas. All right. Now, Bleeding Kansas, okay, is, well, as you can kind of see here, right? Yeah, it's kind of in red. It's bleeding because, like blood's red and all, right? Okay, yeah. So, all right, now Bleeding Kansas actually lasts from 1854 right up into the Civil War. This is one of the reasons a lot of people say this was actually the beginning of the Civil War. I think it's pushing a little bit, but I see their point, okay, on this. So 1854 is when it begins because that's the year the Kansas-Nebraska Act is actually made into law. All right, so here's what you had. You had pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups rushing in to the territory to cast their vote, right? Because it's popular sovereignty. So if the territory, which is trying to become a state, and their constitution says, yeah, we should have slavery, then that's what it becomes, right? Or no, we shouldn't have slavery, then it becomes free. So you had all these people rushing into it. Now add into that, remember how I've told you how outraged the Northerners have become. This is particularly true of that group of abolitionists that we learned about in last week's lessons. They are becoming more and more and more agitated. And in fact, truth be told, more and more violent with their desires to end slavery. They really believe that the only way, John Brown actually says this basically, that the only way that slavery is going to be removed from the country is through the shedding of blood. Now, he had no idea how true and right that statement really was because he said this about 2 years before the Civil War. But the reality of the situation is it's going to take a lot of shedding of blood to remove slavery from the country. Okay, because both sides, by the time we get to Kansas in 1854, both sides are deeply entrenched in their camps. Okay, we are well past at this point the so-called point of no return. Now, you'll see there's some arguments to say that it was inevitable all the way back to 1619 or whatever. Look, guys, I don't think that there's necessarily a hard line that says this is we've passed the point of no return, but I can tell you by the time we get to 1854, we've passed it, wherever it was. Honestly, I really think the Missouri Compromise is probably the best one to sort of distinguish on that. That's sort of my personal opinion on it, but be that as it may, it is what it is, guys. By 1854, we've definitely passed the point of no return. And so there's all this fighting that starts to happen, right? You have all kinds of people that are very adamant about their positions. And nobody wants to back down, okay? So, and there's actual fighting. There's so-called several battles that take place all over Kansas in particular, okay? And upwards of 200 people actually die in the fighting. The numbers are a little sketchy because we don't really know how many people were there, but we do know places like Lawrence, Kansas was actually under siege by, cannon, right? And so it's a rough place, guys. This is why it has the name Bleeding Kansas, okay? Because for this entire time period, there were people being killed on both sides of this issue, and all of that traces its roots back to the popular sovereignty, so much so that they actually came up with 2 constitutions, because, that's going to work. Okay. All right, so that is Bleeding Kansas. Now, at about the same time, you have what's called the Dred Scott decision. Now, the Dred Scott decision, well, it is, how should I put this? Yeah, it's it's definitely one of the worst decisions ever made by the Supreme Court. Some people say it is the worst. I have some personal opinions that it wasn't the worst decision ever made, but it's definitely in, say, the top 3. I'll put it that way. So definitely in the top 3 worst decisions ever made by the United States Supreme Court. Okay, so this is in 1857. So we're just a few years into Bleeding Kansas at this point. Kind of give you a context of it. So what you had here is you had this, slave by the name of Dred Scott. And what he did is he actually sued for his freedom after his master died, arguing that he'd been living on free soil and that made him free. So basically, Dred Scott and his master and the whole family, the master's family, the whole group, they moved into a number of different states and territories that were free. And so the Dred Scott's argument was, well, how can I be a slave in a state that does not have slavery? Like, the two don't, they can't work together. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So he filed a law. He sued in court. He said, I'm going to sue basically for my freedom. And it took a number of years for it to get to the Supreme Court. And eventually, unfortunately, the Dred Scott decision, as it's called, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against him. Okay. And they said a lot of really just terrible things in the decision. It wasn't just enough for particularly the Chief Justice at the time to just make the decision and on the rulings of the legality and just rule on one part of it and move on. Okay, he went into a whole bunch of other things in the decisions. And if you don't remember anything about Supreme Court decisions from your civics class, just know that anytime you have a decision that's handed down by the Supreme Court, they write about basically why the decision they made. Right? They give you the justification, their thinking, the logic, and everything behind it. And now, too, you also have what's called, if there's a dissenting opinion as well, they will write why they said that this decision that was made was wrong, too. Okay, but in the Dred Scott decision, a number of things came out. And one of the things that did come out was that Scott had no rights simply because he was black. Like, that's it. Not because he was a slave, even. That really wasn't ultimately the issue as far as what the court said. Okay. Now, they also went on to say that he had no standing to sue because he was still considered property. So the legal justification that they gave on this was to say, well, only a person or a citizen can bring a lawsuit into court. Because Dred Scott was considered property because he was a slave, he could not bring the lawsuits. Like, he could not even sue for his own freedom because legally he has no ability to do that. It was called standing to do that. Okay, and so there was just a number of different things in this decision. It was just atrocious. There was like nothing good about this decision. Okay, so this is 1857, and not surprisingly, Northerners get mad and frustrated. There's just sort of idea that they don't seem to get, like, why does everything seem to be going against them when it comes to this? Okay, why is it all bad? Why is it that every law, everything, every act, it all seems to be going against them? Now, that's not actually true, but that was the feeling, particularly in the abolitionist folks, that this is what was happening. Okay, so this is like just pouring gasoline onto the fire of those who were frustrated and mad and angry. Okay, so this is the Dred Scott decision in 1857. Now, in part, this helps lead to what's called John Brown's raid. This whole rage that's going on and everything that's happening. So this man by the name of John Brown, now he had actually been a part of Bleeding Kansas. And he actually murdered some folks out there. And, well, he was never arrested for that. But as far as from a legal perspective, justice is served on Mr. John Brown. Now, John Brown actually raided the U.S. Arsenal at a place called Harper's Ferry in Virginia. And his idea was that he was trying to get the guns for a slave revolt. He figured what his thinking was is that he'll get all the weapons and all these slaves in the area will just rise up and come and get the weapons. problem for him was that the slaves never rose up. So he was there, he had his sons and a few other followers, and there were a few slaves that rose up, but not that many, guys. Okay, and so it was an abject failure, okay, as far as actually starting any kind of uprising and revolt. Now, had the slaves risen up, there might have been a chance, okay, but as it stood, um, none of them did. So yeah, and there's all kinds of reason for that, and unfortunately, we don't have all the time to get into that. But there might be a bonus lesson coming up for you that will actually go into some of that if you're really wanting to know. So, all right, but again, this is sort of what's happening with John Brown's raid and the raid at Harper's Ferry. Now, man by the name of Robert E. Lee. Now, you may have heard of Robert E. Lee, right? If you've heard anything about U.S. history and some of the controversies that come out of the Civil War era, you've heard of Robert E. Lee. Virtually no one in this country remembers that he actually she was part of the United States military, and he was the one who actually captured John Brown and his followers. It was Lee who did that, okay? Now, we're going to talk about Lee a lot once we get into the Civil War, and Lee is arguably the most complex of all the generals throughout the Civil War. He is by far the best general. I'll just go ahead and tell you that. He is by far and away the best general in the entire war, okay? But he starts off, first time he really gets on the scene in a big way really is with the John Brown raid. Okay, now the members of John Brown's group, they were actually tried for murder and for treason against Virginia. This is a key point too, that it wasn't, yes, it was against the United States because it was a U.S. arsenal, but he was tried against Virginia. Okay, now we've talked about the balance between federal government's power and rights and states' rights before. And so you see here there was treason against Virginia, okay? And he was sentenced to death for his treasonous act. Okay, now again, he had also committed treason against the United States, but so bottom line, he's killed. And it's really right before his death, before he's killed, when he says those words, that really, blood will have to be shed, okay? Now, what was the result of this? Well, Brown was executed December of 1859. So it's really less than 2 years before the sort of official start of the Civil War in 1861. Okay. Now, many Northerners saw him as a hero. Okay. He was taking it to, those who are pro-slavery. Many Southerners viewed the attack as a threat to their institution. So the Northerners are like, man, he's a hero. He's a martyr, if you will. The Southerners see him as just another example of how the Northerners are coming after their states' rights and their institutions and the whole thing. Okay. All right. So that is John Brown and his raid. Okay, guys. So this really ultimately leaves us to the big question. Okay. What was ultimately the cause of the Civil War? And really and truly, the big question to ask is, was slavery the cause of the Civil War? And this is something that, well, the answer has actually changed over time. Okay, and so, and over the years and over the decades and everything, who you ask, where you lived, all these different things, the question becomes, okay? So the really simple answer is yes and no. Yeah, I know that's the answer you were looking for. Yes and no, okay? And so really, I'm not trying to not give you an answer. In fact, I've got one here I'll share with you in a minute, but it really, yes and no is the actual answer. Now, some people will tell you that it absolutely is the cause of the Civil War. And some people will tell you, no, it's not. It's about economics and politics and cultural differences and all these things, right? And here's the thing, they're both right. I mean, I know, how does that all mix together? Well, this is how. Really, a better way to think about this is that slavery was the thread that connects all these other causes. Okay, so slavery is sort of the ever-present thing in all that we talk about and the differences between North and South, right? The economic differences, slavery's there. Cultural difference, slavery's there, right? I mean, it's ever present. That thread just sort of weaves its way through everything. Okay. And so you'll hear the argument being made that without slavery, none of these things become a problem. I personally wouldn't go that far. I think that if you remove slavery from the equation, I still think that it's very possible that there could have been a civil war, because there were some other significant differences between the different areas and the regions, and there was a sort of inability to truly work them out. And so I think you can make the argument. Now, does slavery make it truly inevitable? Yeah, absolutely it does. But you think you could say, really, well, it's the cotton gin, right? Because the cotton gin, if there's no cotton gin, there's no increase in slavery in the South. And so, I mean, you can always make some other case. But again, that's why I will tell you that slavery was a thread that connects all these causes together. All right, guys, so that wraps up part number next for you guys. There's going to be another video that you guys need to watch. There's some questions you'll need to answer, another assessment. And if you don't know what that is, go back and look at the messages in the class. There's a list. It goes in order. All right, if you, again, you have any questions about anything we talked about for this week or even previous weeks, you guys have got to let me know. If you have assignments, assessments you haven't done, you got to get them done, guys. Those zeros are going to kill your grades, okay? So hope you have a good rest of your week. See ya.